The world outside his window was a silent movie. Cars glided down the rain-slicked street without the hiss of their tires. People hurried under umbrellas, their mouths moving, but no sound came out. For him, the world was a series of moving pictures, a dance of color and light without a soundtrack. But inside his small apartment, there was music. It was a music no one else could hear, a music he didn't hear with his ears, but with his entire body. In the corner of the living room stood an old upright piano, its wood scarred and darkened with age. He called it the old man. It wasn't just an instrument. It was his closest friend, his voice, the place where the silence of his world finally broke. He approached it now, his footsteps soft on the worn wooden floor. He didn't sit on the worn bench right away. First, he took off his shoes and socks, a ritual as natural as breathing. His bare feet pressed against the cool, solid floorboards, which were direct extensions of the old man's legs. He sat, his body leaning forward slightly, his chest almost touching the edge of the keys. He could feel the history in the wood, a faint, ghostly hum of all the music it had held. His hands, long and slender, hovered over the yellowed ivory keys, not touching them yet. He closed his eyes. This was his way of listening. This was the quiet before the storm. He began to play. It was a complicated piece by a composer named Batch, a maze of notes and counterpoint. His fingers danced across the keys, but they did not press down with intention. When his left hand pressed a deep, low C note, a shiver ran up from the floor, through his legs and bloomed in his chest like a warm hum. It wasn't a sound. It was a presence. When his right hand answered with a higher melody, it felt like a series of sparks, like tiny, bright bubbles popping against his ribs. He couldn't explain it to people who heard. How do you describe the color of a wind? Or the taste of a feeling? For him, music was a landscape of vibrations. A major chord felt like standing in the sun, solid and warm. A minor chord was like a shadow falling over you, a cool, tight feeling. A fast run of notes wasn't just quick. It was a thrilling, cascading waterfall of sensation, each drop a distinct pulse against his skin. He wasn't just playing the notes. He was feeling their shape, their weight, their texture. He was having a conversation with the old piano, and it was telling him secrets in a language only his body could understand. His sister watched him from the doorway of the kitchen, holding 2 cups of steaming tea. Her face was a mixture of awe and a deep, familiar worry. She had seen him like this 1,000 times, completely lost in his world of feeling. She saw the intense focus on his brother's face, the way his body swayed with the invisible waves of sound. To her, the room was silent except for the dull thud of hammers hitting strings. She couldn't feel what he felt. She could feel it was to sayings she wrote a part of the users. He was different. He was special kind of, his fingers came from, and its body a very old, as if he old man, he wasn't. He never heard with his own. He, the old man made. He went to the only to have to. It was a story. The music wasn't loud, a symphony. This was his to use his voice. His hands, which he had learned to read the braille of the keys, knowing which note would be a gentle thrum and which would be a sharp felt like a physical shock. He could feel a crescendo coming as a tightening in his chest, a building pressure until the final chord, which would feel like a warm wave washing over him, leaving him breathless and tingling. He didn't just learn to play this way. He had to learn the rules first. His bookshelf was filled not with sheet music, but with books on music theory. He saw music as a beautiful, logical structure. He was like an architect who designed cathedrals without ever hearing the echo of his footsteps inside them. He knew that a minor 7th chord was mathematically designed to create a feeling of tension, and a perfect 5th was designed to feel like coming home. He understood the engine of the music, the way it was built, even if he couldn't hear it run. This knowledge gave him a foundation, a map to navigate the world of feeling. The vibrations were the journey. His sister walked over and placed one of the cups on a small table beside the piano. He finished the piece, the last note fading into a soft hum that he felt in his bones. He opened his eyes and smiled at her. He looked so alive, so happy in that moment. It made her worry even more. "It's beautiful, brother," she said. She always said it was beautiful. She was trying, but she was still thinking of it as a performance, as something to be seen. He motioned for her to sit, then placed his hands on the piano, not to play, but to connect. He looked at her, his expression turning serious. He tapped his heart, then pointed to the wood of the piano, then tapped his heart again. "This is inside the piano," he was saying. "And this is inside me. They are the same." She understood, but she didn't. Her heart ached for him. She had seen the way people looked at him. The pity, the confusion, the dismissals. She had seen his frustration when he tried to explain his passion to others, the way they would pat his head and say he was an inspiration for overcoming his disability. He wasn't overcoming anything. He was living in a different way. And his way was full of music. He pointed to a pamphlet on the table. It was for a place called the Northwood Conservatory. The name was a kind of magic for him. It was a place of legendary musicians, a place where music was treated like a sacred art. He had read about it, seen pictures of its grand concert halls. To him, it was the ultimate test. If he could make them understand, if he could make the experts feel what he was feeling, then he would truly belong. It wasn't about proving his worth, but about showing them that there was more than one way to listen. His sister picked up the pamphlet, her heart sinking. "Brother," she started gently, "why do you have to put yourself through this? Why them? They don't know you." He just shook his head, his expression soft but determined. He took her hand and placed it on the top of the piano, his hand over hers. He pressed down gently, and a low, soft vibration passed through the wood into her palm. It was faint, but it was there. He looked into her eyes, and she saw his plea. "Don't you feel it? This is real. This is everything." She pulled her hand back and sighed. "I do." "But they won't? They only listen with their ears?" She knew he would go anyway. He had a fire in him that she had always admired and always feared. It was the same fire that made his music so breathtaking, and the same fire that could lead to him getting badly hurt. He turned back to the piano, his back to her. He picked up the application for the audition, the words a blur to him, but the picture of the conservatory building sharp in his mind. He would have to fill it out with her help, write about his condition and his unique approach. He knew how it would sound on paper. It would sound like a sad story, a plea for a chance. He hated that. The music wasn't the sad story. The music was the argument. The performance was the only explanation he could truly offer. He put the pamphlet down and rested his fingers on the keys again. He played a simple melody now, something sweet and a little sad. The vibrations were soft and gentle, like a whispered conversation in a language only he and the old man could speak. His sister watched him, her heart torn between pride and the protective instinct to tell him to stop, to stay in the safety of their silent home where his music was perfect and untouchable. But she knew she couldn't. The music was calling him out, into a world that might not be ready to listen. And the hardest part for her was knowing that, even if they couldn't hear him, they would still have the power to break his heart. The day of the audition felt different. The usual comfort of the vibrations was replaced with a nervous fluttering deep in his stomach. He had practiced for months, pushing the old man to its limits, but now he was leaving his small, safe world. He and his sister took the bus across the city. He couldn't hear the engines roar or the hiss of the air brakes, but he could feel them all. The deep, rumbling vibration of the engine was a constant thrum beneath his feet, a steady, powerful heartbeat. The sudden lurch of the bus was a jolt that passed through his whole body. He held his sister's hand tightly, and in its warmth he found a small island of calm. He could feel the small, rapid vibrations of her own nervousness traveling through her palm to his. But he also felt the gentle, reassuring squeeze she gave him every few minutes. The Northwood Conservatory was not a building. It was a statement. It was made of stone and glass, towering and grand. From the outside, it looked like a cathedral. Even in the rain that fell that day, it seemed to glow from within. He felt the vibrations of the city fade as they stepped inside, replaced by a different kind of energy. The air inside was heavy, thick with the ghosts of a million notes. It was a place built for sound, a place where sound lived and breathed. For him, it felt like walking into a sanctuary of a god he didn't completely understand, but deeply respected. His sister looked at him, her eyes wide, trying to ask if he was okay. He just nodded, his jaw set. He had to do this. They found their way to the waiting area. It was a long, polished wood room with high ceilings. Other young musicians were there, some warming up on portable keyboards, others just sitting with their sheet music, their lips moving silently. He felt like an alien. He couldn't hear the quiet scales someone was playing on a flute or the soft murmur of conversation. He could only see them. He saw the way their fingers moved, the confident way they held their instruments. He felt the small vibrations from their shuffling feet and tapping fingers, a chaotic mix of tiny, nervous beats. His sister tried to chat with a girl next to them, but he just stood by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. He felt a deep, chilling loneliness. He had never felt so different, so separate from the world of music he loved. For the first time he felt a sliver of doubt creep in. What if he was just kidding himself? What if this world was right and he was wrong? Then his name was called. A kind-looking woman with a clipboard opened a door and smiled at him. His sister gave his arm one last squeeze. "You've got this," she mouthed, and he could feel the truth of it in her touch. He walked through the door and down a short hallway. The floor here felt different, more solid, more resonant. Every footstep he took seemed to echo up through his legs. At the end of the hall was another door, heavy and dark. He took a deep breath, placed his hand on the cool wood, and pushed it open. The audition room was larger than he expected, but not huge. It was dominated by a grand piano that sat in the center of a spotlight, looking sleek and black and powerful. It was not his old man. This piano was a beast, a predator. It was shiny and perfect, and it looked intimidating. Sitting at a long table a few yards away were three people. The man in the middle was older, with sharp, intelligent eyes and silver hair at his temples. He had an air of absolute authority. This was Maestro Valerius. Leo had seen his picture on the conservatory website. He felt the man's presence before he even saw him, a heavy, focused energy. The other two judges, a man and a woman, sat a little lower in their chairs, their postures suggesting they were there only to support the man in the middle, the woman who led him and spoke. Her voice a series of gentle vibrations he felt in the air. She introduced him by name. Then she paused, and he felt the energy in the room shift. It became colder, sharper. "This applicant has a unique circumstance," she said, her voice careful. "He has been profoundly deaf since childhood." The words hung in the air. He couldn't hear them, but he saw their effect. Maestro Valerius raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something Leo couldn't quite read: surprise, maybe, or skepticism. The woman judge's expression softened into one of pity. The man judge simply looked down at his papers, suddenly very busy. The wall was going up. The wall of prejudice. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving it thin and cold. He felt their eyes on him, no longer seeing a musician, but a curiosity, a case study. He was motioned toward the piano. He walked slowly, his bare feet silent on the polished floor. He didn't sit down right away. He placed his hands on the smooth, cool wood of the piano side. Just as he did with the old man, he had to get to know this instrument. He closed his eyes, feeling for its hum, its character. It was different, more powerful. The potential for vibration was immense, a sleeping giant. He could feel a faint, low thrum, the resonance of the room itself. He took a moment to press his chest against the piano, to feel its potential against his heart. This was his ritual, his way of saying hello. When he opened his eyes, he could feel the judge's confusion. They probably thought he was stalling or praying. He was just listening. He sat on the bench, his body leaning in. He had chosen a difficult piece, an etude by Liszt. It was full of fire and passion, a piece that demanded everything from a pianist. It was also a piece that would produce powerful, clear vibrations. It was his best argument. He placed his fingers on the keys, feeling the cool smoothness of the ivory. He could feel the faint, expectant stillness in the room. They were waiting for him to fail, he began. The first notes were a torrent, a storm of sound. On his old man, the vibrations would have been warm and familiar. On this grand, they were explosive. The deep bass notes felt like thunderclaps against his feet. The high, fast melodies were like a million tiny needles of energy pricking his skin. It was overwhelming, almost too much. He had to fight to control it, to shape the raw power of this new instrument. He poured everything he had into it. He let the vibrations of the fast passages sweep through him, a thrilling, cascading flood. He leaned into the powerful chords, letting the waves of resonance wash over his entire body. He was not just playing. He was wrestling with the sound, taming the beast, making it sing. He couldn't see the judges, but he could feel them. He felt the sharp, sudden vibration of Maestro Valeri's tapping his pen on the table, a series of impatient little jabs. He felt the woman judge shift in her seat, a subtle, uncomfortable squirm. He felt the man judge lean forward, his energy sharp and analytical. They weren't listening. They were dissecting. They were looking for the flaw, the mistake that would confirm their belief that he was just a machine playing notes, a technical trick with no soul. The music he felt so deeply was being reduced to a set of cold calculations. Their energy was a wall, pushing back against him, trying to block his communication with the piano. He played through it, his body tense, his focus absolute. He played the final, crashing chords and then silence. He held his hands over the keys as the last vibrations faded away, a slow, dying echo he felt deep in his bones. He was breathless, his heart pounding. He had given it everything. There was no applause. Just the same thick, heavy silence. He turned on the bench to face them. Maestro Valeri's was looking at him, his expression unreadable. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just nodded slowly. Technically proficient, the man said, his voice a low, dismissive rumble that Leo felt more than heard. The words hit him like a physical blow. Technically proficient. It was the kind of praise you give to a machine. The maestro leaned forward slightly, his eyes boring into him. But music requires an interpreter, not just a performer, he continued, his tone laced with a cold, clinical condescension. You can play the notes, yes, but you cannot interpret what you cannot hear. He said it as a simple, unarguable fact. The emotional connection is absent. He felt a hollow feeling open up inside him. All the feeling, all the passion, all the life he had poured into the music had been received as nothing. Emotionally absent. It was the most cruel, the most inaccurate thing anyone could have said about him. The one place he was most alive was the place they saw as dead. Thank you for your time, Maestro Valeri said, already looking down at his papers. The audition over, he stood up, his legs feeling unsteady. He gave a small, respectful bow and walked out of the room, the heavy door closing behind him, shutting him away from their judgment. The walk down the hallway was a blur. His sister was waiting, her face a mask of hopeful anxiety. She saw his face and her own fell. She didn't need to ask. She just took his hand in hers, a small, sad gesture of comfort. The week that followed was the longest of his life. He didn't play the old man. He couldn't. The music had been wounded. He just sat in the silent apartment, the memory of the maestro's words replaying in his mind. Then the letter came. It was a crisp, official-looking envelope. He knew what it was before he even opened it. His sister read it to him, her voice soft and hesitant. It was a standard rejection letter using polite, professional words that hid a brutal truth. It spoke of his impressive technical skill, but cited the same reason as the maestro, a lack of musicality and emotional connection. They thanked him for his interest. He took the letter from her hand. The words were just black shapes on a page, but they felt like weights. They had taken his pee. The silence in the apartment became a heavy blanket. It wasn't the comfortable silence he was used to. It was an empty, suffocating quiet. The old man, his faithful friend, stood in the corner like a stranger. He would walk past it, his hand brushing against its wood, but he felt nothing in return. The connection was broken. His sister tried everything. She made his favorite foods, put on movies with the subtitles turned on, and sat with him for hours, just being there. But his spirit had retreated deep inside itself. The rejection letter had done more than just deny him a spot. It had denied him his very identity. The maestro's words, emotionally absent, echoed in the hollow space where his music used to be. He felt like a ghost in his own life, floating through a world that had no color, no texture. His sister watched him fade a little more each day. She saw the way his shoulders slumped, the way his eyes, once so bright with passion, were now dull and distant. It broke her heart to see him like this. She couldn't fix this with a warm meal or a comforting hug. The wound was too deep. She felt helpless. One evening, after finding him just staring at the wall for the third hour in a row, she knew she had to do something more. She remembered a conversation she'd had months ago with a woman from a community support group. The woman had mentioned a man, a scientist, who had lost his hearing as an adult. He didn't play music, but he understood sound in a way no one else did. Desperate, she found the old contact information and sent a long, heartfelt message explaining what had happened to her brother. The reply came the next day. It was from a man named Dr. Aris Thorne. He wrote simply, "I understand. Please bring him to my workshop. I will be waiting." The workshop was in a part of the city filled with warehouses and artist studios. It was on the second floor of an old brick building. When they arrived, the door was open. The space inside was nothing like the pristine grand hall of the conservatory. It was a cluttered, magical world of organized chaos. Wires ran along the floor like vines. Shelves were packed with strange metal objects, oscilloscopes, and machines whose purpose was a complete mystery. In the center of the room, under a bare bulb, sat a man with kind, crinkly eyes and wild white hair. He was working on something, a tangle of wires and circuit boards, but he looked up as they entered. This was Dr. Thorne. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at the young man, his gaze filled with a deep, knowing empathy that needed no words. Dr. Thorne stood up and walked over. He didn't offer pity or empty encouragement. He just put a gentle hand on his shoulder, a gesture of simple, human connection. Then he led him to a large, strange-looking platform in the middle of the room. It was a raised platform about 5 feet square, made of dark wood and metal. "I call it the feeling floor," Dr. Thorne said, his voice a low, pleasant vibration. "The floorboards are special. They're connected to these transducers. They take sound from here," he pointed to a large speaker on a stand, "and turn it directly into vibration. No air, no noise. Just pure feeling." He motioned for him to step onto the platform. He did so hesitantly. Dr. Thorne then went to a keyboard and played a single, low C note. As the note sounded, a deep, pure, and incredibly strong shudder traveled up from the solace of his feet, through his legs, and into his entire body. It was clean. It was powerful. It was unlike anything he had ever felt with the old man. The feeling wasn't muffled by the carpet or dampened by the old wood. It was direct. It was a shock. He looked at Dr. Thorne, his eyes wide with a question he didn't know how to ask. Dr. Thorne smiled. "The old man is a wonderful friend," he said, as if reading his mind. "But he's like listening to a story through a thick wall. You get the main idea, but you miss the details. We need to break down that wall." For the next few weeks, the workshop became his new home. Dr. Thorne was not a music teacher. He was a sound engineer, a physicist of feeling. He didn't teach him how to play the piano better. He taught him how to listen better. He brought in a large screen and connected it to a computer. He played a simple scale. On the screen, a beautiful, flowing line appeared, each note a perfect hill and valley. "This is what a C major scale looks like," Dr. Thorne explained. "See how smooth it is? Predictable, beautiful." Then he played a more complex scale, one with some notes that were slightly off-key. On the screen, the smooth line was now jagged, with small, ugly spikes. "The ear hears this as a mistake," Dr. Thorne said. "Your body feels it as a rough edge, a pointy vibration. It's physically uncomfortable. The theory you learned from books? Now you can see it. Now you can feel it in a new way." They spent hours like this. Dr. Thorne would play chords, and he would stand on the feeling floor, not just feeling the general vibration of the chord. but learning to distinguish the individual voices within it. He learned that a major chord wasn't just a happy feeling. It was a smooth, stable, balanced vibration, like standing on solid ground. A minor chord wasn't just sad. It was a less stable, more tense feeling, a subtle wobbling that asked to be resolved. Dr. Thorne taught him about overtones and harmonics, the secret sounds that live inside every single note. When you play a C on the piano, he explained, you're not just hearing one C, you're also hearing a quieter C1 octave higher, a G above that, and an E above that all at the same time. They're what give the note its color, its personality. On the feeling floor, he began to feel these hidden layers. A single note was no longer a simple pulse. It was a complex texture, a rich tapestry of vibrations. He could feel the bright, sharp edge of a high harmonic and the warm, rolling foundation of the fundamental note. It was like discovering a new color in a world he thought was black and white. His understanding was no longer just emotional. It was becoming physical and precise. He learned to feel the attack of the hammer on the string as a sharp initial jab and the decay of the note as a slow, gentle release. He could feel the subtle difference in vibration when the sustained pedal was pressed a little versus a lot, the way it blurred the edges of the notes, turning a sharp picture into a soft focus painting. He was learning to control these feelings with his playing, to sculpt the vibrations with his fingers. One day, Dr. Thorne placed a different kind of machine next to the feeling floor. It had a series of lights on it. This is a visualizer, he said. It takes the vibrations from the floor and shows them as colors and patterns. Dr. Thorne played a complex, jazzy piece. The floor pulsed with the intricate rhythms, and on the machine, a constantly shifting pattern of deep blues and warm purples danced in time with the music. Then he played a slow, mournful melody. The floor vibrated with long, deep waves, and the machine glowed with a steady, melancholic green. "Now you play," Dr. Thorne said. He sat at a keyboard connected to the system. He played the same Liszt piece from his audition. Before, he had played it with passion and fire. Now, he played it with a new awareness. He was no longer just wrestling with the beast. He was conducting it. On the feeling floor, he could feel the vibrations build exactly as he wanted them. He could feel the subtlety of a pianissimo note, a whisper of a vibration, as clearly as the thunder of a fortissimo chord. He watched the lights on the visualizer, and he saw his music painted in light. He was not just playing music. He was seeing it, feeling it, and shaping it all at once. The performance was a conversation between his hands, his body, and the very fabric of the sound itself. When he finished, he looked over at Dr. Thorne. The old man was leaning against a workbench, a profound, peaceful smile on his face. He wasn't just a teacher anymore. He was a fellow traveler, someone who understood the silent world and the beauty that lived within it. He had not given him a magic cure. He had simply given him a better map and a more powerful compass. In the following weeks, a change began to happen in him. The deep, hollow ache in his chest started to fill up again, not with the naive passion of before, but with a quiet, powerful confidence. The maestro's words had hurt because they had felt like a judgment on his very soul. But Dr. Thorne had shown him that his soul was not broken. His way of listening was not a disability. It was just a different, highly refined sense. The emotional connection was not absent from his music. It was the very foundation of it. He started to compose his own small pieces, simple melodies that he wrote on the feeling floor. He wasn't thinking about the conservatory or the judges. He was just exploring. Each new vibration was a discovery, a new word in the language of his body. The silence of his own apartment was no longer empty. When he returned home each evening, it felt warm and full of potential. The old man was waiting for him. He knew that when he sat down to play again, he would not just be telling the piano a secret. He would be showing it a whole new world. He had been broken open, and in the cracks, a new kind of light was shining through. The invitation came on a plain piece of paper, a stark contrast to the formal, embossed rejection he had received months ago. It was an invitation to perform at the city's annual Rising Stars showcase. It was a big deal, a night where the most promising young musicians got to share a stage with seasoned professionals. The audience was always packed with critics, talent scouts, and the city's most influential patrons of the arts. And at the top of the bill was a performance by the top students from the Northwood Conservatory. Dr. Thorne had made a few quiet calls. The invitation was not a promise of fame, but a chance. A single open door. He didn't want to go. The thought of stepping back onto a stage, under the weight of so many watching eyes, made his stomach clench. But Dr. Thorne just looked at him with those calm, knowing eyes and said, "The music doesn't belong in the workshop forever. It's time to let it breathe." The night of the showcase, the city's grand concert hall was a glittering sea of expectation. People dressed in their finest clothes swarmed through the lobby, the air buzzing with excited chatter. He couldn't hear it, but he could feel it. The floor vibrated with the energy of 100 conversations, a low, steady hum that felt like a nervous, living thing. His sister was with him, holding his arm, her presence a steady anchor. Backstage, the air was different. It was tight with tension. He saw the other performers, the Northwood students in their sharp, black suits and elegant dresses. They held their instruments with an easy confidence, their movements fluid, their faces familiar with the bright lights. He felt the sharp, precise vibrations of their nervousness, a tapping foot, a quickly twirled drumstick, a violinist's hand tracing the fingerboard again and again. It was the energy of performers who belonged. He felt like a trespass, or he was scheduled as the final act of the first half, a special experimental performance, as the program called it. The words made him feel like a sideshow. From the wings, he watched the first few acts. A flautist played a piece so light and fast it felt like a swarm of tiny, buzzing bees. A cellist played with such deep, sorrowful emotion that he felt the ache of it in his own chest. They were brilliant. They were technically perfect. He could see it in their posture, see the precision in their fingers. The audience responded with polite, warm applause that he felt as a series of soft, rolling tremors through the stage floor. Then a young man walked onto the stage. He was the star pupil of the Northwood Conservatory, the same school that had rejected him. He sat at the grand piano, a sleek, modern instrument that looked like it belonged on a spaceship. The pianist's posture was perfect, his hands a blur of efficient, graceful movement. He played an incredibly difficult Rachmaninoff piece, a storm of notes that filled the hall. He felt the power of the music, the thundering chords that shook the stage. The performance was flawless. A machine made of flesh and bone, executing every command with absolute precision. The audience erupted in applause, a vibration so powerful it felt like an earthquake. He saw Maestro Valeris sitting in the front row, a proud, satisfied smile on his face. The maestro was applauding loudly, his energy radiating approval. This was his definition of music. This was perfection. It was his turn. He walked onto the stage. The bright lights blinded him, turning the audience into a faceless black sea. He didn't look at them. He kept his eyes on the piano. It was the same grand piano the other pianist had used. As he approached, he did his ritual. He took off his shoes. A few quiet, confused murmurs rippled through the crowd, a feeling of scattered, uncertain vibrations. He ignored them. He placed his bare feet on the cool, smooth wood of the stage. He felt the solid, resonant floor, just as he did with Dr. Thorne's feeling floor. This was his ground. He went to the piano and placed his hands on its polished side. He closed his eyes, pushing away the memory of the audition, the face of the maestro. He took a deep breath, listening with his body. He felt the low hum of the hall, the faint, ghostly vibrations of the music that had already been played. He said a silent hello to the instrument. He felt its potential, its power. He was ready. He sat down on the bench, leaning in, connecting his body to the wood. He was going to play the same Liszt piece he had played for his audition. It was a challenge to himself and to everyone who had ever doubted him. He placed his fingers on the keys. The stage was silent, the energy in the room tense with curiosity, and he could feel a little pity. They were waiting to be impressed by a trick, he began. The first notes were not a torrent. They were a whisper. A single, delicate melody, so soft he could barely feel it in his fingertips. It was a feeling like a question, a quiet plea. He felt the audience lean in, their collective energy sharpening with focus. He could feel Maestro Valerius's energy, a pinpoint of intense analysis, waiting for the mistake, for the evidence of his limitation, but the mistake never came. The quiet melody began to grow, gathering strength like a small stream joining a river. He let the vibrations build, feeling the music swell in his chest. He was not just playing the notes. He was feeling the story they told. The Liszt piece was a story of struggle and defiance, of a fight for freedom. He had felt it before, but now he inhabited it. The fast, fiery passages were not just a display of speed. They were the feeling of being chained and thrashing against the bonds. He felt the frantic energy, the desperation in the frantic, cascading vibrations that flowed up from the piano. He leaned into it, letting his body move with the struggle. He was no longer separate from the music. He was the music. He was no longer aware of the audience or the judges. The world had shrunk to just him and the piano. His hands, which had once been seen as the tools of a technician, were now sculpting the raw material of sound, shaping it into something living and breathing. He was conducting a conversation of vibrations, and the piano was answering him back. It wasn't a fight anymore. It was a dance. A wild, passionate, desperate dance. The piece reached its climax, a series of crashing, thunderous chords. He poured all of his anger, all of his pain, all of his defiance into those final notes. He felt the music as a physical force, a wave of pure energy that broke over him, leaving him breathless and trembling. He held his hands over the keys as the last, powerful vibrations slowly faded away, like a storm moving out to sea. Leaving behind a profound and echoing quiet, he opened his eyes. He was breathing heavily, his heart pounding. He sat there for a moment, coming back to himself. He was in the concert hall. The lights were still bright. The audience was still there. And it was silent. It was not the polite silence that follows a good performance. It was not the empty silence that follows a bad one. It was a thick, heavy, all-consuming silence. The air in the hall was completely still. He could feel no vibrations from the audience at all. It was as if every single person in the room had stopped breathing. They were frozen. The silence was a full-body experience, a palpable presence. He looked out at the blackness, but he could feel their collective shock, their collective awe, as a single, unified energy. It was the sound of 3,000 minds being blown. 10 seconds. 15, 20. The silence stretched on. So long that he began to wonder if he had imagined the whole thing. He started to feel a familiar pang of doubt. Had it been a failure after all? Then, a single sound broke the stillness. It was the sound of one person clapping. It was a sharp, clear vibration from the back of the hall. Then another. And another. Suddenly, like a dam breaking, the entire hall erupted. The sound was not just loud. It was physical. It was a roar, a tidal wave of vibration that crashed over the stage, so powerful it made the wooden floor tremble beneath his feet. It was a wave of pure, unbridled emotion, a physical manifestation of their shock, their joy, their understanding. He slowly stood up. He looked out, but the lights were too bright to see faces. He didn't need to. He could feel them. He felt the surge of appreciation, the release of tension, the overwhelming approval. He looked down and saw Maestro Valerius. The man was sitting perfectly still, his hands frozen in his lap. His pen had fallen to the floor. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He looked not at his hands, not at the program, but at him. The maestro, who believed music could only be heard, had just been silenced by a performance that had been felt. He gave a simple bow, not to the critics, not to the experts, but to the music, and to the silence that had understood it before the sound began. He walked off the stage, the thunderous applause following him like a warm, living thing. His sister met him in the wings, tears streaming down her face. She didn't say anything. She just wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight. He held her back, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was standing on completely solid ground. He had not been accepted in spite of his silence. He had triumphed because of it. The music had spoken for itself, and everyone finally had listened. The roar of the applause felt like a physical thing, a wave of warmth that washed over him as he walked backstage. It was a sound he had never truly experienced before. It wasn't just noise. It was a collective feeling, a massive, shared heartbeat of emotion that vibrated through the floor, up his legs, and into his very soul. His sister was crying, but they were not tears of sadness or worry anymore. They were tears of pure, overwhelming release. She pulled him into a hug, and for the first time, her embrace didn't feel like an act of protection. It felt like a celebration. He had stepped into the fire and had not been burned. He had emerged, glowing. The moments that followed were a blur. People surrounded him, a wall of bodies and a storm of vibrations. He couldn't hear their words, but he could feel their intent. A gentle, steady hand on his shoulder felt like respect. A light, excited tap on his arm felt like congratulations. A journalist, his energy a fast, sharp buzz, tried to thrust a microphone in his face, but he just shook his head and pointed to his sister. He was tired. The music had taken everything he had, and now the crowd's energy was overwhelming. He didn't want to talk. The music had already said all he needed to say. He let his sister be his voice, guiding him through the chaos. Her steady presence a shield against the storm. Later that night, back in the quiet of his small apartment, the world felt different. The familiar silence was no longer a void. It was peaceful, restful. He sat at the old man, his fingers tracing the patterns of its worn, familiar keys. He played a simple, soft melody, not for an audience, not for a judge, but for himself. The vibrations that rose from the old wood were not the explosive power of the concert grand, but they were his. They were home. As he played, his sister sat beside him, translating the news she was reading on her phone. The early reviews were coming in. "Listen to this," she said, her voice a soft hum. "It says, tonight we did not just hear a performance. We experienced a communion. A young man did not merely play the piano, he became a conduit for its very soul. To call it music feels inadequate. It was a physical and spiritual act of feeling." He stopped playing and looked at her. A communion. A conduit. That was it. That was the word for it. He hadn't been playing for them. He had been letting them play through him. She scrolled down. Another one says, "Forget the labels. Forget the narrative." What we witnessed was simply one of the most profoundly moving musical statements of this generation. He taught us that we have been listening with only one sense, and tonight, a master taught us to listen with our entire being. He felt a warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't pride. It was relief. It was the feeling of being seen, not as a curiosity or an inspiration, but as an artist. The critics weren't writing about a deaf pianist who overcame adversity. They were writing about a musician who changed their understanding of what music could be. The silence in the hall before the applause, that moment of shared, stunned silence that had been the real performance. It was the moment 3,000 people had learned to listen without their ears. A few days passed. The performance had become the talk of the city, not just a story, but a phenomenon. People who were there talked about the silence, the feeling of it. They tried to describe it to their friends, struggling to put a physical experience into words. He stayed in his quiet world, slowly finding his way back to the simple joy of playing for himself. He had proved his point. The fire inside him was no longer a desperate need for validation, but a calm, steady flame. Then one afternoon, there was a knock at the door. It was the mail carrier with a single envelope. It was a simple, cream-colored envelope with his name written on it in elegant, familiar handwriting. He didn't recognize the name, but the handwriting itself had a certain authority to it, a confident, sharp script. His sister was out, so he took it to his desk and opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper. He couldn't read the words, but he recognized the letterhead at the top. It was from the Northwood Conservatory. His heart gave a little nervous flutter. He had already received his rejection. What more could they want? He took the letter to Dr. Thorne's workshop. The old man was hunched over a new contraption, but he looked up and smiled when he saw the concerned look on his face. He placed the letter in Dr. Thorne's hands. Dr. Thorne read it slowly, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he folded the letter and looked at him, a strange, thoughtful look in his eyes. "It's from Maestro Valeri's," Dr. Thorne said quietly, his stomach tightened. He was prepared for anything. An apology? A second more polite rejection? "He doesn't write much," Dr. Thorne continued, his voice gentle. "There are no fancy words, no grand explanations." He cleared his throat and began to read, his voice a low, simple vibration. He says, "I have spent my life teaching students how to play the music they hear. You have taught me that music can also be felt." "I was wrong." Dr. Thorne paused, letting the weight of those 3 words, "I was wrong," settle in the quiet room. He says, "I would be honored if you would consider a fellowship at Northwood, to teach us what you know." He stood perfectly still, the words echoing in the silent workshop. He had imagined this moment 100 times, always as a moment of triumph, of vindication. But now that it was here, it felt different. It felt ... quiet. The maestro wasn't inviting him to be a student. He was inviting him to be a teacher. The man who had said he was emotionally absent was now asking him to teach the very thing he was accused of lacking. It wasn't just an acceptance. It was a complete reversal, a humble admission from the pinnacle of the musical world. The wall of prejudice had not just been broken. It had been dismantled from the other side. He thought about it for a long time. The idea of walking back into that grand building as a teacher felt strange. He was not a lecturer. He did not have degrees or diplomas. His knowledge was not in books. It was in his bones. But then he thought of the other students, the ones who played with perfect technical skill, but whose music sometimes felt empty. He thought of the star pianist from the showcase, whose flawless performance had been brilliant but hollow. He had something to give them. He had a new way to listen. He accepted the fellowship. The story ends some months later. He was no longer in his small apartment. The Northwood Conservatory had offered him a beautiful, light-filled space to live in. But the center of the room was not a new, flashy grand piano. It was the old man. They had carefully moved it from his old home, and it sat there, scarred and wise, surrounded by the clean, modern lines of the conservatory's world. It was a perfect symbol of his journey. He was not leading a large class. He worked with small groups of students, the ones who were brave enough to try something new. He would have them take off their shoes and stand on a special resonating platform he had designed with Dr. Thorne's help. He wouldn't talk about music theory. He would play a simple chord and ask them, "What does that feel like in your chest? In your feet? Is it smooth or sharp? Does it feel like the sun or a shadow?" He was teaching them to close their eyes and to listen with their bodies. He was still deaf. The world outside his window was still a silent movie, but it was a world that now heard him in a way he never thought possible. He was no longer the man who was deaf and undervalued. He was a musician, a teacher, a bridge. He had found his place not by changing who he was, but by embracing it completely. He sat at the old man, his hands resting on the keys, a small, peaceful smile on his face. He had spent his life searching for the music in the silence, and in the end, he had shown the world that the silence had been music all along.